The signal came on a Tuesday morning, cutting through every television screen, radio broadcast, and computer monitor on Earth. It was impossible to ignore and even more impossible to shut off. The face that appeared was not human. It had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern, skin that shimmered like oil on water, and a mouth that split vertically instead of horizontally. "Greetings, humans of Earth," the creature said in perfect English, though its mouth movements didn't match the words. "I am Commander Velt of the Zathran Collective. We have been watching your broadcasts for many cycles now. We find your species fascinating. In government buildings across the world, alarms rang. Military commanders rushed to situation rooms. World leaders were pulled from meetings and meals to watch the unprecedented event unfold. This was first contact, the moment humanity had dreamed about and feared for generations." Commander Velt continued speaking, its 4 eyes never blinking in unison. "Your people speak much of peace. You debate instead of act. You form committees instead of armies. You negotiate instead of conquer. We have watched your entertainment, your news, your endless discussions. You are a divided species on a single planet, arguing about borders on one small world." The commander's vertical mouth split wider, showing rows of crystalline teeth. The Zathran found this amusing. The galaxy is vast, humans. There are empires that span hundreds of worlds. There are species that have conquered entire sectors of space. The Zathran Collective controls 47 star systems. We have subjugated 12 species. We have fought wars that would turn your oceans to vapor, and we have never encountered a species quite like yours. Around the world, people stopped what they were doing. Traffic halted as drivers pulled over to watch on their phones. Workers gathered around break room televisions. Students stared at their laptops in silent classrooms. The entire planet held its breath. "You claim to value life above all else," Velt said. "You speak of human rights, of dignity, of the sanctity of existence. These are words we have studied. They are foreign concepts to us. In the galaxy, strength determines survival. The weak serve the strong. This is natural law." The commander leaned closer to whatever camera was recording this message. All 4 eyes seemed to focus on different points, as if looking at millions of people individually. "We wish to extend an invitation to humanity. In 7 of your days, we will hold a demonstration, a cultural exchange, if you will. We invite you to send representatives to witness the might of the Zathran Collective. 10 million of your people should be sufficient. We will provide transportation. Consider this a great honor. Many species would die for such an opportunity." There was a pause. The commander's expression was impossible to read with human understanding, but something in the way it held itself suggested satisfaction. "Of course, this invitation is not truly optional. If humanity refuses, we will interpret this as hostility, and we deal with hostile species in only one way. We erase them. You have 7 days to select your 10 million representatives and prepare them for transport. We will send coordinates. Do not disappoint us, humans. We are very curious to see how you respond to reality." The transmission ended as suddenly as it had begun. Normal programming tried to resume, but nobody was watching anymore. The world exploded into chaos. Emergency sessions were called at the United Nations. The Security Council met continuously for 48 hours straight. Every nation's intelligence agency scrambled to understand what had just happened. Scientists analyzed the transmission, trying to determine if it was real or an elaborate hoax. The conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. It was real. The signal had come from outside the solar system. The technology required to hijack every broadcast on Earth simultaneously was beyond human capability. The debates began immediately. Some nations refused to comply, calling it surrender before a shot had been fired. Others argued that sending 10 million people to certain doom was unthinkable. A few suggested it might truly be a peaceful cultural exchange, though these voices grew quieter as the hours passed. "We don't even know if they have the capability to reach Earth," the American president argued during a video conference with world leaders. "This could be a bluff. Can we afford to assume that?" The Chinese premier countered. "If they can broadcast to our entire planet simultaneously, what else can they do?" The Russian president's face was grim on the screen. "We should prepare for war. Begin evacuations. Mobilize every military on Earth, and fight what?" the British Prime Minister asked. "They claim to control 47 star systems. If that's true, they have resources we can't comprehend. We still struggle to keep a handful of people alive on Mars for a few months." The arguments continued, but time was running out. On the third day, the Zathran sent another message. This time it was shorter. We detect hesitation, humans. This disappoints us. To encourage your cooperation, we will provide a demonstration. 2 hours later, every satellite in orbit around Mars stopped functioning. They simply went dead all at once with no warning. When ground control at Earth's various space agencies finally re-established visual contact using Earth-based telescopes, they saw why. The satellites were gone. Not destroyed, not damaged, and simply gone. In their place floated perfect spheres of compressed metal, each about the size of a basketball. The satellites had been crushed into perfect geometric shapes and left in orbit as a message. The Mars colony reported seeing ships, dozens of them appearing from nowhere, performing their task and vanishing again. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes. The debates ended. Earth had no choice. The selection process was agonizing. Some nations volunteered prisoners, arguing that it gave convicts a chance to serve humanity. Others held lotteries, spreading the burden across their entire population. A few relied on military volunteers, men and women who stepped forward knowing they might never return. Religious organizations sent missionaries, hoping to establish peaceful relations with the aliens. Scientists volunteered, eager to make contact regardless of the risk. And there were those who simply had nothing left to lose, the desperate, the dying, the ones who saw this as their last chance for meaning. By the 7th day, 10 million people had been gathered. They came from every nation, every culture, every walk of life. They were young and old, healthy and sick, brave and terrified. They gathered at designated coordinates across the globe, standing in massive groups that covered entire fields and valleys. The ships arrived exactly on schedule. They descended from the sky in broad daylight, massive vessels that made no sound despite their enormous size. Each ship was different, built from materials that seemed to shift and change color in the light. Some were organic-looking, with surfaces that pulsed like living tissue. Others were geometric and precise, all sharp angles and clean lines. Beams of light reached down from the ships and the humans below began to float upward. There was no sensation of movement, no wind, no force. One moment they stood on Earth and the next they were rising into the sky. Some screamed, others prayed. Many simply watched in silence as their home planet grew smaller beneath them. Maria Chen held her daughter's hand as they rose together. She had volunteered them both when the lottery selected her husband. She refused to let her family be separated, even if it meant facing the unknown together. Her daughter, only 8 years old, squeezed her hand tightly but didn't cry. She had been brave throughout the entire process, understanding in the way children sometimes do, that her mother needed her to be strong. Beside them floated James Morrison, a retired soldier who had volunteered without hesitation. He had fought in 3 wars during his career and figured if this was to be humanity's last stand, he wanted to face it head on. His military bearing remained even as he floated through the air, back straight, jaw set. Thousands of others surrounded them, all rising together toward the belly of the alien ship. The opening appeared seamlessly, a gap in the vessel's hull that hadn't been there moments before. They passed through into a vast chamber that seemed impossibly large given the ship's exterior dimensions. The interior was lit by a sourceless light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The walls were smooth and featureless. As the last human entered, the opening sealed behind them without a sound. There was a moment of absolute silence as 10,000 people stood in the chamber, waiting for something to happen. Then the floor became transparent. Or perhaps it disappeared entirely. It was impossible to tell. Below them, Earth hung in space like a blue and white marble. They were already in orbit, though there had been no sensation of movement, no feeling of acceleration. A voice echoed through the chamber, speaking in hundreds of languages simultaneously, each person hearing it in their native tongue. Welcome, humans. Your journey to the arena will take 3 of your days. We suggest you rest. You will need your strength for what comes next. The ships began to move, carrying their human cargo away from Earth. On the planet below, billions watched the vessels depart, tracked by every telescope and satellite humanity possessed. The ships accelerated to speeds that shouldn't have been possible, bending the laws of physics as humanity understood them. Inside the UN headquarters, the Secretary General stood before the General Assembly. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. We have done as they demanded. 10 million of our people are in their hands. Now we wait and pray that this truly is the cultural exchange they described. We have prepared a response for every scenario we can imagine. Our militaries stand ready. Our scientists work around the clock on defensive measures. But in truth, we are powerless. We can only hope that reason and compassion exist in species other than our own." She paused, looking at the representatives from nearly every nation on Earth. "And if this goes badly, if our people are harmed, we must be ready to respond, not with revenge, for revenge against such power would be suicide, but with survival, with the protection of those who remain. We must ensure that humanity continues, no matter what happens in the next few days." The assembly voted unanimously to maintain constant communication with the transported humans if possible, to monitor the situation continuously, and to prepare evacuation protocols for Earth's population if necessary. It was all they could do. On the ships, the 3 days passed in surreal stillness. The humans were provided with food that tasted of nothing but sustained them. They were given water that was perfectly pure. They slept on floors that somehow felt comfortable despite being hard as stone. And they waited. Some formed groups, finding comfort in numbers. Others isolated themselves, preparing mentally for whatever was to come. Religious services were held in dozens of languages and traditions. Prayers rose to gods of every faith, asking for protection, for mercy, for meaning in what was happening. Maria spent the time telling her daughter stories, anything to keep her mind occupied. James organized some of the other veterans, not for any real purpose, but because structure helped manage fear. They taught breathing exercises, meditation techniques, anything that might help people stay calm. On the 3rd day, the ships began to slow. Through the transparent floor, a planet came into view. It was larger than Earth, with 3 moons visible in orbit around it. The surface was marked by massive structures, geometric patterns that covered entire continents. This was no natural world. This was engineered, built, shaped by intelligent design. "We have arrived," the voice announced. "Welcome to Arena World. You are the guests of the Zathran Collective. Billions across the galaxy will witness what happens here. We hope you will provide adequate entertainment." The ships descended toward the planet's surface. Through the transparent floor, the humans could see a massive structure coming into focus. It was circular, easily 100 miles in diameter, with walls that rose thousands of feet into the air. The interior was visible from above, a landscape of artificial terrain, forests and deserts and mountains, all contained within the arena's boundaries. And at the edges, in structures that ringed the entire arena, were seats, millions of seats already filling with beings from dozens of species. The audience was gathering to watch whatever was about to happen. The ships deposited their human cargo in the center of the arena. 10 million people suddenly stood on alien soil, surrounded by manufactured terrain enclosed by walls too high to climb. Above them, the sky showed the planet's 3 moons and the vast emptiness of space beyond. The voice spoke one last time, now echoed through speakers around the arena so loud that every being in the structure could hear. "Let the demonstration begin." The arena floor trembled beneath 10 million human feet. Around them, the artificial landscape stretched in every direction. Patches of forest dotted with clearings, rocky outcroppings that formed small hills, streams of water that flowed from nowhere to nowhere. It might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Instead, it felt like a cage. In the stands above, the audience settled into their seats. The beings came in every imaginable form. Some were humanoid, others insectoid, still others defied easy description. They chittered and hummed and spoke in languages that hurt human ears to hear. But one thing was universal across all species present. They were excited. This was entertainment for them. Commander Velt appeared on massive screens that materialized in the air above the arena. The Zathran leader's 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as it surveyed the humans below. "Honored guests from across the galaxy," Velt began. Its voice translated simultaneously into dozens of languages for the various species present. "Today we demonstrate why the Zathran Collective stands as the premier military power in this sector. Today we show what happens to species that mistake our generosity for weakness. Today we hunt humans." The last word echoed across the arena. In the stands, the alien audience erupted in sounds that might have been cheering. On Earth, billions watched through a live feed that the Zathran had graciously provided. Every news station carried the broadcast. Every screen showed the same horrifying image. Millions of humans trapped in an arena while aliens cheered for their deaths. "The rules are simple," Velt continued. "Survive if you can. Fight if you dare. Run if you must. We have allotted 6 hours for this demonstration. Our warriors will enter the arena in waves. We will showcase various hunting techniques, different weapon systems, multiple tactical approaches. Think of this as educational. By the end, the galaxy will understand the futility of opposing Zathran might. The commander paused, all 4 eyes seeming to focus on the humans below. Oh, and one more thing. We will be selecting special participants for individual demonstrations. Those who show particular fear or courage will be given opportunities to address the galaxy before their end. We believe in giving the condemned their final words. It makes for better viewing. The screens flickered and changed, now showing the faces of terrified humans from dozens of angles. Cameras floated throughout the arena, capturing every expression, every tear, every moment of dawning horror. The Zathran wanted the galaxy to see every detail. Maria pulled her daughter close, wrapping both arms around the girl. Around them, people were screaming, crying, trying to run toward the walls only to find them too smooth to climb. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others simply stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. James Morrison's military training kicked in. He began shouting orders, trying to organize people into groups, attempting to create some form of defensive formation. A few hundred responded, mostly other veterans who recognized the voice of command. But what defense could they mount against an enemy they hadn't seen yet? With no weapons, no cover, no hope. The first gates opened along the arena walls. They were small openings, barely visible from the center where most humans clustered. But what emerged from those gates was impossible to miss. The Zathran warriors were massive, each one standing at least 8 feet tall. They wore armor that seemed to be made of the same shifting material as their ships, colors flowing across the surface like oil. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, rifles that crackled with barely contained power. There were hundreds of them spreading out along the arena's perimeter, taking positions like hunters surrounding prey. Wave 1 begins, Felt announced. Long-range elimination. We will demonstrate the accuracy of Zathran weaponry at various distances. The warriors raised their rifles. The weapons discharged with sounds like thunder, bolts of energy that crossed the arena in instants. Where they hit, humans simply ceased to exist. There was no blood, no gore, just instant vaporization. One moment a person stood there, the next there was nothing but a slight shimmer in the air where they had been. The screaming began in earnest then. People ran in every direction, but there was nowhere to go. The arena was miles across, but the energy bolts traveled faster than any human could run. The warriors fired methodically, taking their time, demonstrating their precision. They targeted individuals across vast distances, showing off their marksmanship to the audience above. Maria ran, dragging her daughter by the hand. Around them, people vanished as energy bolts found their marks. She could hear her daughter crying but couldn't stop. Some animal instinct driving her to keep moving even though reason said it was pointless. James tried to coordinate a scattered defense, getting people to take cover behind the rocky outcroppings. It bought them seconds, maybe minutes. The Zathran simply adjusted their aim, firing around obstacles or through them when the mood struck. The rocks offered no real protection, just the illusion of safety that made the hope more painful when it was stripped away. For 30 minutes, the long-range demonstration continued. The cameras captured it all, the running, the dying, the desperate attempts at survival that all ended the same way. The audience in the stands made their alien sounds of appreciation. Some took notes on datapads. Others simply watched with what might have been fascination or hunger or boredom. It was impossible to tell with alien faces. On Earth, people watched in horror. In living rooms and bars, in public squares and private homes, humanity witnessed its own slaughter. News anchors struggled to find words. Religious leaders attempted to provide comfort that rang hollow. Government officials made statements about condemnation and justice that everyone knew were meaningless. The UN Security Council met in emergency session. But what could they do? Even if Earth's entire military could somehow reach the arena planet, they would arrive too late. The massacre would be over in hours, and even if they could arrive in time, what chance did human weapons have against technology that could crush satellites into perfect spheres and hijack every broadcast on Earth simultaneously? Wave 1 complete, Felt announced after the long-range demonstration ended. The Zathran warriors lowered their rifles. Behind them, the arena floor was noticeably less crowded. Hundreds of thousands had died in the first wave. Casualties: 743,216. Excellent accuracy ratings. The galaxy should note the precision of Zathran weapons technology. The commander's face filled the screens again, all four eyes gleaming. Now we move to Wave 2, medium-range combat. Our warriors will advance to closer positions and demonstrate rapid-fire capabilities. This will be somewhat less precise but far more impressive in terms of kill rate per minute. We recommend the audience watch carefully. This is where the art truly shines. The warriors began advancing into the arena, moving in coordinated groups. They spread out across the terrain, taking positions behind the same cover the humans had tried to use. They were in no hurry. This was a demonstration, after all. Every movement was calculated for maximum visual impact. When they opened fire this time, it was different. The weapon switched to automatic mode, spraying bolts of energy in wide arcs. Humans died in groups now, dozens at a time. The cameras zoomed in to capture faces in the moments before death, the expressions of terror and despair and resignation. Maria found herself separated from her daughter in the chaos. She screamed the girl's name, trying to push through the panicking crowd. Around her, people were trampling each other in their desperation to escape the energy bolts that cut through the air like deadly rain. She saw her daughter then, standing alone near one of the artificial streams. The girl had fallen, gotten back up, and now stood frozen in fear. Maria ran toward her, arms outstretched, knowing she wouldn't make it in time but unable to stop trying. A camera drone swooped down, hovering between Maria and her daughter. It captured both of their faces, the mother running, the child waiting. The image was broadcast across the galaxy, a perfect tableau of human suffering. Then a Zathran warrior stepped into view, rifle aimed at the child. It paused, looking up at the camera drone, aware it was being featured. The warrior tilted its head in what might have been the Zathran equivalent of a smile. "No," Maria's scream echoed across the arena. "Please, she's just a child. Please." The warrior's attention shifted to Maria. It considered for a moment, then spoke into a communicator. Seconds later, Velt's voice boomed across the arena. "We have our first special participant. Bring the woman and child to the central platform." Energy bolts struck the ground around Maria and her daughter, not killing but hurting. Other warriors emerged, using their weapons to guide both humans toward the center of the arena, where a platform had risen from the ground. It was only then that Maria realized the platform had been there all along, waiting for this exact purpose. They were forced onto the platform, which rose 30 feet into the air, rotating slowly so every camera could capture them from every angle. Maria held her daughter tight, both of them shaking, unable to speak. Velt's face appeared on screens that surrounded the platform, close enough that Maria could see every detail of the alien's features. "Tell me, human mother, what do you feel right now?" Maria couldn't answer. Her throat had closed, her mind was blank with terror. "Come now," Velt pressed. "Billions are watching. Surely you have something to say. Some final words for your species. Some plea for mercy? Some curse against us? Give the audience what they came for." Maria found her voice then, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why are you doing this?" "What did we do to you?" "Nothing," Velt replied, and there was something almost like satisfaction in its tone. "You did nothing to us." "That is precisely the point. You exist in a galaxy where power determines survival, yet you claim to value peace above all else. You are a contradiction that offends the natural order. We are correcting that error. By killing children?" Maria's voice grew stronger with anger. "By murdering millions? What does that prove except that you're monsters?" The audience made sounds that might have been laughter or agreement or outrage. Impossible to tell. "Monsters," Velt repeated, tasting the word. "An interesting choice. We are not monsters, human mother. We are the reality you refuse to accept. The galaxy is not kind. It is not fair. It is not safe. And species that cannot accept this truth do not survive. Consider this education for those watching on your homeworld." Velt paused, letting the moment stretch. "Of course I am not without mercy. I will give you a choice. You or your daughter. One may live through this demonstration. The other dies now. Choose." Maria's mind went blank. Her daughter sobbed against her chest. Around them, the massacre continued. Energy bolts cutting through crowds, warriors advancing, humans dying by the thousands. The cameras captured every detail of Maria's face as she processed the impossible choice. "I choose me," she finally said. "Kill me." "Let her live." "How touching," Velt said. "But I asked which would live, not which would die." "Choose which one survives. Say it clearly." "Let my daughter live." Maria said, pulling the girl closer. Please. Very well. The energy bolt hit Maria in the chest. She felt nothing. There wasn't time. One moment she existed, holding her daughter. The next moment she was gone, and the girl stood alone on the platform, screaming for her mother who had vanished from her arms. The platform lowered slowly, returning the child to the arena floor. A warrior nudged her away from the platform with its rifle, sending her stumbling into the chaos. The cameras followed her for a few more seconds, capturing her aimless wandering, then moved on to find new subjects. On Earth, the broadcast showed it all. The choice, the mother's sacrifice, the child's loss. It was designed to break something in those watching. And it worked. In homes around the world, people wept or raged or simply sat in stunned silence. The massacre continued for hours. Wave 2 transitioned to Wave 3, close combat demonstrations. Zathran warriors put down their rifles and drew bladed weapons that hummed with energy. They moved through the remaining crowds, showcasing their fighting techniques against unarmed humans who tried desperately to fight back with rocks and sticks and bare hands. It was no contest. The warriors were faster, stronger, protected by armor that human fists couldn't dent. They cut through people with casual efficiency, making it look effortless. Some warriors performed elaborate flourishes between kills, spinning their weapons, striking poses for the cameras. James Morrison died in Wave 3, finally overcome after trying to tackle a warrior with nothing but his hands. The alien killed him quickly, almost respectfully, recognizing a fellow soldier. His death wasn't featured on the main screens. He was just one of millions. Wave 4 was aerial assault. Flying drones entered the arena, equipped with smaller weapons but greater speed. They hunted down the humans who had tried to hide in the forests, the ones who had burrowed into the artificial terrain, the ones who thought they had found safety. There was no safety. The drones found everyone. Wave 5 was the finale. Heavy weapons, area effect attacks. The remaining humans, perhaps a few 100,000 now, were herded into the center of the arena. The warriors withdrew to the edges. Then the bombardment began. Energy mortars that struck the ground and released expanding spheres of destruction. Incendiary devices that filled the air with flames. Sonic weapons that disrupted human biology at the cellular level. It was efficient. It was thorough. It was designed to leave no survivors. When the 6 hours ended, the arena floor was empty. 10 million humans had entered. None remained. The artificial landscape was scorched and cratered. The streams had evaporated. The forests were ash. Commander Velt appeared on the screens one final time, addressing the galaxy. This concludes our demonstration. The Zathran Collective has shown the fate that awaits any species foolish enough to oppose us. Let this be a lesson to all who watched. Power is the only truth. Strength is the only law. Mercy is a weakness that we will not tolerate in ourselves or others. The commander's 4 eyes turned toward the camera, as if looking directly at Earth. Humans of Earth, you have 24 hours to surrender your planet. Dismantle your weapons. Submit to Zathran authority. Join your fellow species under our rule. If you refuse, what happened in this arena will happen on your world. We will erase your cities, your people, your very memory from the galaxy. You have seen what we are capable of. Do not test us. The transmission ended. The broadcast cut to black. Around the galaxy, billions of beings processed what they had witnessed. Some were horrified. Some were impressed. Some were calculating whether the Zathran were now a threat or an opportunity. On Earth, there was only silence. A terrible, crushing silence as an entire species tried to comprehend what it had just witnessed. 10 million dead in 6 hours. Slaughtered for entertainment. Broadcast live to the galaxy as a warning. In the UN headquarters, world leaders gathered in emergency session. But no one spoke. What was there to say? They had 24 hours to surrender or face extinction. The silence stretched, heavy with grief and rage and the weight of an impossible decision. Then somewhere deep in a classified bunker beneath Colorado, a phone rang. It was answered by a man in a military uniform who hadn't slept in 3 days. He listened for 10 seconds, then spoke 2 words that changed everything. Authorization granted. Around the world, similar phones were ringing. Similar authorizations were being granted. Protocols that had existed since humanity first split the atom were being activated. Systems that had been designed for extinction-level threats were coming online. Earth's governments had their answer to the Zathran ultimatum, but they would not broadcast it. They would not announce it. They would not debate it in public forums or argue about it in committee meetings. They would simply act. The 24-hour countdown had begun, but the Zathran had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed the silence from Earth meant fear. They had interpreted the lack of response as submission. They did not understand that humanity's silence was not surrender. It was preparation. They would learn the difference soon enough. The first hour after the broadcast ended was the quietest Earth had ever known. Cities that never slept fell silent. Traffic stopped. People stood in the streets staring at blank screens, unable to process what they had witnessed. The entire planet seemed to be holding its breath. In that silence, something changed. It was not visible to those walking the streets or sitting in their homes. It happened in bunkers buried miles underground, in secure facilities hidden beneath mountains, in laboratories that officially did not exist. Doors opened that had been sealed for decades. Computers activated that had never been connected to any network. Scientists and engineers received calls from numbers that showed up as blank on their phones. The second hour was different. The silence broke, but not with panic. In military bases around the world, personnel began moving with purpose. Cargo was loaded onto transport planes. Convoys rolled out of warehouses that had been listed as empty for years. Ships left ports carrying containers whose manifests were classified at levels most governments didn't acknowledge existed. By the third hour, the pattern was clear to anyone watching carefully. But no one was watching carefully. The world's attention was on the grief, the horror, the impossible question of what to do next. They didn't notice that every major power on Earth was mobilizing in perfect synchronization, following plans that had apparently existed all along. In Geneva, the UN Secretary General stood before an emergency session. Her face was calm, almost serene, which was perhaps the most disturbing thing about her appearance. "The Security Council has met," she said simply. "We have reached unanimous agreement on a response to the Zathran ultimatum. The details of this response are classified. No debate will be held. No vote will be taken. This is not a democracy anymore. This is survival." She paused, looking at the assembled representatives. "In approximately 20 hours, the Zathran will learn our answer. Until then, I ask for your trust. I ask you to go home and tell your people to remain calm. Tell them that humanity has not surrendered. Tell them that we are not sheep waiting for slaughter. Tell them nothing else because there is nothing else to tell." The representatives erupted in questions, demands for information, accusations of dictatorship. The Secretary General simply walked off the stage. Behind her, armed guards closed the doors to the chamber. The emergency session was over. What the representatives didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that the Secretary General had just activated something called Protocol Erebus. It was a document that had been drafted during the Cold War, updated during the nuclear tensions of the early 21st century, and refined by every subsequent crisis that threatened human extinction. The protocol was simple in concept. If humanity faced elimination, all restrictions were lifted, every weapon too dangerous to use, every technology too risky to deploy, every experiment too unethical to continue. All of it was now authorized. Not just authorized, mandated. The survival of the species overrode every law, every treaty, every moral consideration. In the face of extinction, humanity would use everything it had. And humanity had been preparing for extinction for a long time. Deep beneath the Australian outback, in a facility known only as Site 7, engineers worked on machines that had been theoretical 5 years ago. They were called dimensional full drives, and they bent space in ways that made Einstein's equations look like elementary school math. The drives had never been tested beyond simulation. The risk was too high. A malfunction could create a cascade effect that would tear apart local spacetime. But risk didn't matter anymore. In the mountains of China, particle physicists activated an accelerator that dwarfed the Large Hadron Collider. It had been built in secret over 15 years, designed to probe energies that could theoretically destabilize matter at the quantum level. The international physics community had agreed such research was unconscionable. But that agreement was void now. The accelerator hummed to life, beginning experiments that would make nuclear fusion look like rubbing sticks together. Beneath the Arctic ice, in a Russian facility that appeared on no maps, biologists worked with organisms that had been engineered beyond anything natural. They were called nanite colonies, self-replicating machines at the microscopic level, programmed to disassemble matter and rebuild it according to predetermined patterns. The colonies had been designed as a last resort weapon, too dangerous to deploy because once released, stopping them would be nearly impossible. Teams began loading the nanite colonies into delivery systems designed to survive atmospheric entry from orbit. In Nevada, at a base that officially handled weather research, aeronautical engineers fueled spacecraft that had been built using stolen and reverse-engineered alien technology, not Zathran technology. Earth had been visited before by other species who had left wreckage behind that curious humans had studied intensely. The ships were experimental, barely tested, with success rates in simulation that hovered around 60%. But they were fast, faster than anything the Zathran had shown because they didn't obey the same physical laws. They operated by creating temporary micro-wormholes, jumping through space rather than traversing it. The crews that would pilot them had been training in secret for years, volunteers who knew they were preparing for a mission that might never come. The mission was coming now. In the Atlantic Ocean, submarines that weren't supposed to exist quietly surfaced long enough to receive encrypted transmissions, then dove deep again. They carried weapons that most naval commanders didn't know about. Torpedoes equipped with singularity generators that could collapse a cubic mile of matter into a point of infinite density. The submarines had been positioned strategically around Earth, waiting for an alien invasion that military planners had always known was a possibility. Now they received new orders: leave Earth's orbit, proceed to coordinates that would be transmitted, prepare for offensive operations. The submarines were capable of space travel. Most people would have been shocked to learn that fact, but the technology had existed for decades, classified at levels that required genetic verification to access. The vessels could transition from water to vacuum, their hulls designed to handle both environments. They began ascending, carefully timed to look like normal submarine operations to any satellites that might be watching, though all human satellites had been quietly disabled hours ago to prevent the Zathran from observing what was happening. By the 6th hour, the mobilization was complete but still hidden. To the average person on Earth, nothing seemed to be happening. Governments made statements about negotiation. Religious leaders counseled prayer. Mental health professionals prepared for a wave of trauma counseling. Everyone assumed the next 18 hours would be spent in agonizing debate about surrender terms. No one knew that Earth's most advanced weapons were already launching into space, that hundreds of vessels were accelerating away from the planet using drives that defied conventional physics, that target coordinates were being calculated for every Zathran military installation in their 47 star systems. In Geneva, in a room beneath the UN building that required 5 separate security clearances to enter, military commanders from every major power on Earth stood around a holographic display. The display showed the known galaxy, with Zathran territory highlighted in red, 47 star systems, hundreds of planets, thousands of military installations. The scope was overwhelming. An American general spoke first. Even with everything we're deploying, the numbers aren't in our favor. The Zathran have had centuries to build their forces. We've had 6 days to prepare. Then we don't fight fair, a Chinese admiral replied. We hit every target simultaneously. They won't have time to coordinate a defense. The simultaneity is the problem, a European Space Command officer said. Even with the full drives, we can't get to all 47 systems at once. The farthest targets are hundreds of light years away. We don't need to reach them all at once, said a woman in a uniform without insignia. She was the commander of strategic operations, a division that officially didn't exist. We need to cut off their ability to communicate. The Zathran broadcast their massacre to the galaxy. That means they have an enormous communications network. We take out the network hubs first. Then we take out their military assets while they're blind. She highlighted several points on the holographic display. Intelligence suggests these 6 systems contain their primary relay stations. They're not military targets, so they'll be lightly defended. We hit these first with the nanite payloads. The colonies will consume the relay stations and everything around them in approximately 40 minutes. By the time the Zathran realize they're under attack, they won't be able to warn anyone. And then, the American general asked, then we show them what humans are capable of when we stop holding back. The commander said, every weapon we've ever been afraid to build, every technology we've ever considered too dangerous to deploy, it all goes active. We target their military infrastructure, their shipyards, their defense platforms. We don't give them time to respond. We don't give them time to understand what's happening. We just erase their ability to hurt anyone ever again. A Russian colonel studied the display. This is genocide. We're talking about destroying an entire species' military capacity. Some estimates suggest that we'll kill billions of Zathran. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what was being proposed. This wasn't a defensive action. This was retaliation on a scale that humanity had never attempted. The complete dismantling of an interstellar empire. They killed 10 million of us for entertainment, a Japanese commander said quietly. They broadcast it to the galaxy as a lesson. They gave us 24 hours to surrender or face extinction. What choice have they left us? We could surrender, someone suggested, though their tone said they didn't believe it was a real option. And then what? The Strategic Operations Commander asked. We live as slaves to the species that murdered our people for sport? We hope they'll be merciful masters? They've shown us exactly what mercy means to them. It means nothing. She looked around the room at the assembled commanders. I'm not going to pretend this is justice. It's not. It's revenge. It's survival. It's a message to every species watching that humans are not prey. We are not entertainment. We are not weak. Touch us and we will end you. Not defeat you. Not repel you. End you completely. The American general nodded slowly. When do we launch the operation? The first wave is already in position. We're just waiting for authorization from the Secretary General. As if summoned by the mention, a communication came through. The Secretary General's face appeared on screens around the room. You have authorization, she said simply. Protocol Erebus is in full effect. Rules of engagement are suspended. Mission parameters are clear. Eliminate the Zathran military's capacity to threaten Earth or any other species. Use whatever means necessary. No restrictions. No limitations. No mercy. She paused, and for the first time, emotion showed on her face. Grief, rage, and something harder to define. They wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about strength. Let's teach them one about restraint. They thought we were weak because we choose peace. Show them why we choose peace. Show them what we're capable of when that choice is taken from us. Show them what monsters we keep locked away behind our morality, and why those locks exist. The transmission ended. The commanders looked at each other, the weight of what they were about to order settling on them. The Strategic Operations Commander spoke first. Execute Operation Prometheus. All weapons free. All targets authorized. Let's show them what fire looks like when humans bring it. Across the solar system, hidden ships received the go order. Full drives activated, tearing tiny holes in space. The vessels disappeared from Earth's solar system and reappeared in 6 different Zathran systems, each one containing a primary communications relay. The nanite payloads deployed silently, cascading through the relay stations like invisible plagues. The Zathran technicians working at these stations didn't notice anything wrong at first. Then their instruments began showing impossible readings. Matter was disappearing, converted at the molecular level into more nanites. The stations began to collapse, consumed from within. Alarms blared. Emergency protocols activated. But the nanites were faster, spreading through the station's infrastructure, disassembling support structures, power systems, transmission arrays. Within 20 minutes, the 6 largest communication hubs in Zathran space simply ceased to exist. In their place floated clouds of undifferentiated matter, and trillions of microscopic machines waiting for new instructions. On Zathran military command stations across their empire, screens went dark. Communications channels fell silent. Commanders tried to understand what was happening, but without the relay networks, they couldn't contact each other. Each installation was suddenly isolated, cut off, blind. That's when the second wave hit. Human ships appeared in orbit around Zathran military worlds. They weren't invasion forces. They weren't there to land troops or conquer territory. They were delivery systems for weapons that most humans would have considered war crimes. Relativistic kinetic strikes were the simplest weapons in humanity's arsenal, and among the most devastating. Take a dense projectile, accelerate it to a significant fraction of light speed, and let physics do the work. The energy of impact was measured in megatons. The human vessels launched thousands of these projectiles at Zathran orbital platforms, shipyards, and defense stations. The impacts were visible from the planets below. Structures that had stood for centuries flashed into vapor. Orbital defense grids designed to stop conventional attacks were overwhelmed in seconds. The kinetic strikes moved too fast for point defense systems to track, too numerous to intercept even if they could be targeted. Dimensional compression bombs were more sophisticated. They created localized distortions in spacetime, collapsing the normal 3 dimensions into 2 or even 1. Anything caught in the effect was crushed at the atomic level, compressed into forms that physics said shouldn't exist. Human vessels deployed these against the largest Zathran military installations. The fortresses that had been considered impregnable, the fortresses imploded, their massive structures collapsing into impossibly thin sheets or even one-dimensional lines. Then the distortion fields collapsed, and the released energy detonated in secondary explosions that lit up entire continents on the worlds below. The Zathran tried to fight back. Their defense forces scrambled. Ships launched from surviving facilities, but they were fighting blind, unable to coordinate, unclear where the attacks were coming from or how many attackers there were. Human vessels appeared from fold space, fired their weapons, and vanished before return fire could be calculated. It wasn't a battle. It was extermination. Clinical, efficient, merciless. On the Zathran homeworld, Commander Velt stood in the central command center, watching reports flood in from across the Empire. Every screen showed the same thing: devastation. Facilities going dark, ships destroyed, entire defensive networks collapsing. What is happening? Velt demanded, all 4 eyes wide with disbelief. Where are these attacks coming from? Unknown, Commander, a technician reported. Communications are down across the Empire. We're receiving scattered signals from surviving installations, but they contradict each other. Some report human vessels, others report unknown attackers. The descriptions don't match any known species technology. Humans? Felt's vertical mouth split in what might have been confusion or disbelief. Impossible. They don't have interstellar capability. They barely have sustainable colonies on their own moon. Nevertheless, Commander, the reports are consistent. The attacking vessels match no known designs, but the weapon signatures are consistent with theoretical Earth technology. They appear to be using experimental drives and weapons that shouldn't exist. Velt stared at the screens, watching centuries of Zathran military dominance crumble in real time. The Empire was being dismantled piece by piece, and they couldn't even fight back effectively because they couldn't see their attackers coming. Get me a communication channel to Earth, Velt ordered. Now. Commander, all relay stations are offline. We can't. Then build a direct beam. Use emergency protocols. I don't care how you do it, just get me a channel to Earth. It took an hour to establish the connection, an hour during which the attacks continued unabated. By the time Velt's face appeared on screens across Earth, the Zathran had lost more than half their military infrastructure. The commander looked different than before. The confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been fear, though it was hard to tell with alien features. Stop, Velt said simply. Please stop this. On Earth, the Secretary-General watched the transmission from the UN building. Around her, the military commanders maintained their positions around the holographic display, watching the real-time updates of the operation's progress. The Secretary-General gestured to a technician who opened a return channel. Her face appeared on screens in the Zathran command center. No, she said simply. You don't understand, Velt continued, and there was definitely fear in its voice now. We will cease hostilities. We will leave Earth alone. We will withdraw from this sector entirely. Just stop the attacks. You killed 10 million of my people, the Secretary-General said, her voice utterly calm. You did it for entertainment. You broadcast it to the galaxy. You gave us 24 hours to surrender or face extinction. Did you think we would simply submit? Did you think we would forget? It was a demonstration of strength, Velt said, and the words sounded hollow even as they were spoken. Standard protocol for— I don't care about your protocols, the Secretary-General interrupted. I don't care about your reasons. I don't care about your empire or your strength or your standard procedures. You touched humanity, and now you'll learn why we try so hard to be civilized. It's not because we're weak. It's because we know what we become when civilization fails. The transmission ended from Earthside. Velt stood in the command center staring at the blank screen, understanding for the first time that the Zathran collective was going to die, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The attacks continued through the night. By the time the 24-hour deadline expired, the Zathran military no longer existed as a functional force. 47 star systems that had been fortified over centuries were reduced to wreckage. The operation continued into its second day. What had begun as surgical strikes evolved into systematic dismantling. Human forces moved through Zathran space like a tide, methodical and unstoppable. Every military installation, every shipyard, every weapons development facility, all were targeted and eliminated. The Zathran tried to mount a defense. In some systems, they managed to organize scattered forces, pulling together whatever ships and crews had survived the initial assault. These attempts at resistance were brief. Human vessels appeared without warning, deployed their weapons, and vanished before Zathran forces could coordinate return fire. The fold drives gave humanity an advantage that couldn't be overcome. They controlled when and where battles happened. In the Talax system, home to the Zathran Third Fleet, Admiral Court commanded 73 warships that had been conducting exercises when the attacks began. By the time communications had been restored enough to understand what was happening, the Third Fleet was the largest intact Zathran military force remaining. Court ordered an immediate defensive formation around the system's shipyards, hoping to protect the construction facilities that could rebuild the Zathran military. The human response was swift and devastating. 16 vessels emerged from fold space at the system's edge. They were small by Zathran standards, no larger than corvettes. The Third Fleet moved to engage, confident that 73 ships could handle 16, regardless of technological advantages. The human vessels didn't engage in traditional combat. Instead, they launched a new type of weapon the Zathran had never seen. The projectiles were small, barely visible on sensors, and they moved at velocities that seemed impossible. When they struck Zathran ships, they didn't explode. They simply passed through. For several seconds, nothing happened. Admiral Court watched in confusion as the projectiles pierced his formation, passing through ship after ship without apparent effect. Then the reports started coming in. Admiral, we're detecting massive system failures across the fleet. Power cores are becoming unstable. Life support is failing. It's like... The communication officer's voice cut off as the flagship's own systems began to crash. What the Zathran didn't know was that the projectiles contained billions of nanites, programmed specifically to target ship systems. The microscopic machines spread through vessels like infections, identifying critical components and disassembling them at the molecular level. Within 5 minutes, every ship in the Third Fleet was dead in space. Power cores collapsed, life support offline, weapon systems dismantled from within. The human vessels moved through the disabled fleet, launching escape pods with automated systems. The pods collected Zathran crew members who had survived and transported them to the nearest habitable planet. The humans weren't interested in killing soldiers who could no longer fight. They were interested in eliminating threats. Once the crews were evacuated, the human vessels deployed singularity charges. The charges activated simultaneously, creating dozens of micro-black holes that consumed the disabled ships entirely. Matter spiraled into impossible gravitational wells, compressing into nothing. Within an hour, the Third Fleet simply ceased to exist. The same pattern repeated across Zathran space. Forces that attempted to resist were disabled, their crews evacuated if possible, their vessels destroyed completely. Forces that surrendered immediately were treated the same way. Disarmed, crews evacuated, ships eliminated. Humanity wasn't taking prisoners of war in the traditional sense. They were simply removing all military capability. On the Zathran homeworld, the population watched in horror as their empire collapsed around them. Commander Velt had been removed from command by the High Council, who blamed the disaster on Velt's decision to antagonize humanity. But the change in leadership made no difference. The human attacks continued regardless of who was in charge. The Zathran High Council attempted to contact other species, seeking aid against the human onslaught. The responses ranged from refusal to outright hostility. Many species had been subjugated by the Zathran over the centuries. Those species saw this as justice finally served. Others, who had maintained neutral relations with the Zathran, simply closed their borders and made it clear they wanted no part in this conflict. A few species offered asylum to Zathran civilians, and human forces made no attempt to interfere with these evacuations. It became clear that humanity's target was specifically the Zathran military, not the species as a whole. This distinction did nothing to comfort the Zathran, who watched their empire's power evaporate in a matter of days. By the third day, the Zathran homeworld stood as the last remaining military installation of any significance. Orbital defense platforms ringed the planet, supported by the remnants of the home fleet, approximately 200 warships that represented the entirety of Zathran military, power still capable of fighting. The High Council debated their options in an emergency session. The chamber was chaos, with representatives from various Zathran colonies arguing over what to do. "We should surrender immediately," one counselor argued. "Every hour we resist costs more lives. The humans have proven they can destroy us at will." "Surrender to what?" another counselor shot back. "They haven't made demands. They haven't offered terms. They simply attack and destroy. What are we surrendering to?" "To survival," a third counselor said quietly. "We surrender to the possibility that they might let us live if we stop fighting." The debate was interrupted by alarms. On screens around the chamber, the council watched as human vessels appeared in orbit. There were dozens of them, larger than the strike craft that had conducted most of the operation. These were capital ships bristling with weapons, positioned in a formation that surrounded the planet completely. A communication came through, the first message humanity had sent since the operation began. The Secretary General's face appeared on screens throughout the Zathran homeworld. "People of the Zathran Collective," she began, her voice transmitted in the Zathran language. "Your military has been eliminated. Your capacity to wage war no longer exists. You have two choices now. You can attempt to defend this planet, in which case we will eliminate your remaining forces and your orbital infrastructure, or you can stand down, evacuate your defensive positions, and allow us to complete our mission without further loss of life." She paused, letting the words sink in. "To be clear, we are not here to conquer you. We are not here to occupy your worlds or subjugate your people. We are here to ensure that you never threaten anyone again. Once your military capability is eliminated completely, we will leave. What you do after that is your concern. But you will do it without warships, without weapons of mass destruction, without the ability to harm other species. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, we will proceed regardless of your choice. We recommend evacuation." The transmission ended. The High Council sat in stunned silence. "They're giving us a choice," one counselor said. "That's more mercy than we showed them." "It's not mercy," another replied. "It's efficiency. They don't want to kill civilians if they don't have to, but they will if we force them." The debate lasted exactly 45 minutes. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The Zathran home fleet powered down their weapons. The orbital platforms deactivated their defense systems. Evacuation orders were issued, and military personnel began abandoning their posts. The human vessels waited patiently as Zathran soldiers fled to the surface. When the orbital platforms were empty, human ships moved into position and began systematic demolition. The platforms were dismantled piece by piece, broken down to their component materials. The warships of the home fleet were likewise disassembled, their weapon systems carefully extracted and destroyed, their drives rendered inoperable, their hulls reduced to scrap. It took 12 hours to complete the operation. When it was finished, the Zathran homeworld remained intact, its population alive, its cities untouched. But the planet was defenseless, surrounded by the debris of its once mighty military, unable to threaten anyone ever again. Similar operations concluded across the 47 systems. Military installations were eliminated. Defense networks were dismantled. Shipyards were destroyed or converted to civilian purposes. Within 4 days of the massacre, the Zathran Collective had been reduced from a feared military empire to a collection of defenseless worlds. The human fleet began withdrawing, folding back to Earth space. But before they left, they deployed something new: monitoring stations. Automated platforms were positioned throughout former Zathran space, equipped with sensors and weapons. The platforms were programmed to observe and report. If the Zathran attempted to rebuild their military, if they tried to develop weapons of mass destruction, if they made any move toward regaining their former power, the platforms would activate and destroy whatever had been built. The message was clear. The Zathran could live, could rebuild their civilian infrastructure, could continue as a species. But they would never again be a military power. Humanity would ensure that. On Earth, the operation was classified immediately upon conclusion. The public knew only that Earth's military had responded to the Zathran threat. The specific details of how that response was carried out, what weapons were used, what capabilities humanity actually possessed, All of that was sealed under security protocols that would remain in place for generations. The few who knew the full truth carried the weight of that knowledge quietly. They had unleashed weapons that broke fundamental physical laws. They had deployed technologies that most humans would consider science fiction. They had demonstrated a capacity for coordinated violence on an interstellar scale that made historical wars look like children's games. And most disturbing of all, they had done it efficiently. No grandstanding, no speeches about justice or revenge during the operation itself, just clinical elimination of a threat. The moral justification could come later. In the moment, there had been only the mission: make the Zathran incapable of harming anyone ever again. In the UN building, the Secretary General met privately with the military commanders who had executed Operation Prometheus. The holographic display had been shut down. The room felt smaller without it. The operation was successful, she said, though it wasn't a question. The Zathran military no longer exists. Confirmed, the Strategic Operations Commander replied. All primary targets eliminated. Secondary targets eliminated. The monitoring network is in place and operational. If they try to rebuild, we'll know immediately. Casualties on our side? Surprisingly minimal. We lost 8 vessels to enemy action, approximately 200 personnel. Given the scope of the operation, that's better than any projection suggested. The Secretary General nodded slowly. And Zathran casualties? The commander consulted a tablet. Military personnel killed, approximately 15 million. Civilian casualties, fewer than 10,000, mostly from secondary effects of the strikes. We evacuated when possible, avoided civilian targets, followed the rules of engagement as closely as the situation allowed. 15 million, the Secretary General repeated. We killed 15 million of them in response to them killing 10 million of us. With respect, ma'am, we eliminated their military in response to them threatening to exterminate our entire species. The casualty count is almost irrelevant to the actual mission objective. Almost irrelevant, she said. Almost. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood that they had just overseen the most significant military operation in human history. They had taken humanity from a single planet species with no interstellar presence to a power that had dismantled an empire spanning 47 star systems. They had revealed capabilities that would change Earth's position in the galaxy forever. What happens now? The American general asked. Now, the Secretary General said, we live with what we've done. We go back to being the species that values peace, that negotiates instead of fights, that tries to solve problems through diplomacy, but everyone will know, including us, that it's a choice. We're not peaceful because we're weak. We're peaceful because we understand what we're capable of when we're not. She looked at each commander in turn. Operation Prometheus is sealed under the highest classification. The technologies we used are to be stored again, locked away, hopefully never needed again. The personnel involved are to be dispersed to various assignments with cover stories that explain their absence. This operation officially never happened, at least not in the way it actually did. And the monitoring stations? The Strategic Operations Commander asked. They remain active indefinitely. The Zathran are never to be a threat again. If they attempt to rebuild their military, we respond immediately and with the same level of force. But if they remain peaceful, we leave them alone. We're not conquerors. We're not interested in ruling other species. We just want to ensure our survival and the survival of anyone who might be targeted by species like them. The commanders began filing out, returning to their various posts, beginning the process of standing down the emergency protocols. The Secretary General remained alone in the room, staring at the blank space where the holographic display had been. She thought about the broadcast she had watched 3 days ago, the massacre in the arena, the children crying for parents who had been vaporized, the casual cruelty of Commander Velt as it offered impossible choices and then punished the choices people made. She thought about the counter-broadcast that would go out later today. Not a military report, not a threat, not a boast. Just a simple message to the galaxy explaining what humanity had done and why. The message would shock the galactic community. Some species would be horrified. Others would be impressed. A few would be terrified, but all of them would understand that humanity was not what they had appeared to be. The Zathran had mistaken human restraint for weakness, human preference for peace as inability to wage war. They had learned the difference. The entire galaxy would learn it too, and hopefully, the Secretary General thought, Hopefully that lesson would be enough. Hopefully no other species would make the same mistake. Hopefully the price that had been paid, 10 million human lives, 15 million Zathran lives, and the weight on human souls of what they had unleashed, would buy lasting peace. Because if another species forced humanity to unlock those weapons again, if the monitoring stations detected new threats, if Earth had to activate Protocol Erebus one more time, the Secretary General wasn't sure how much of humanity's civilization would survive the moral cost. They had proven they could be monsters when necessary. The question was whether they could still be human afterward. She would spend the rest of her life trying to answer that question. 7 days after the massacre in the arena, Earth broadcast its message to the galaxy. The transmission was sent on every frequency, in every language that human xenolinguists had managed to decode from intercepted communications. It would reach thousands of worlds, be heard by hundreds of species, and change the way the entire galaxy thought about humanity. An admiral appeared on screens across civilized space. She wore a simple uniform with few decorations, standing against a plain background. There was nothing threatening about her appearance, nothing aggressive in her posture. She looked like someone delivering a weather report. That casual calm was somehow more disturbing than any display of force would have been. "My name is Admiral Sarah Chen," she began. "I speak on behalf of the unified government of Earth and her colonies. Many of you witnessed what the Zathran Collective did to our people 1 week ago. They killed 10 million humans in an arena, broadcast the massacre across the galaxy, and then demanded our surrender within 24 hours. They told us this was a lesson about strength. They said the galaxy operates on power alone, and that our preference for peace marked us as weak." She paused, and something like sadness crossed her face. "They were wrong. We are not a warrior species because we choose peace. We choose peace because we understand what we become when we abandon it. We choose peace because we know the cost of war, not just in lives lost but in souls corrupted. We choose peace because we have looked into the darkness of our own nature and decided we would rather live in the light." Her expression hardened. "But when that choice is taken from us, when our people are slaughtered for entertainment, when we are threatened with extinction, we remember what we are capable of." The Zathran asked for a demonstration of strength. We have provided one. The transmission cut to footage of the operation. Not everything, the specific weapons and technologies remained classified, but enough. Images of Zathran military installations collapsing, orbital platforms being dismantled, warships reduced to debris. The scope of the destruction was clear. An empire that had stood for centuries was gone in less than a week. The footage ended, returning to Admiral Chen. The Zathran Collective controlled 47 star systems. They commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands of ships. They possessed weapons that could sterilize planets. They had subjugated 12 species over their history. As of this morning, they possess none of these things. Their military has been eliminated completely. Their capacity to wage war no longer exists. She let that sink in for a moment. We did not do this for conquest. We did not do this for territory or resources or revenge. Despite having every justification for revenge, we did it because a species that would commit such an atrocity for entertainment, that would threaten to repeat it on our homeworld, cannot be allowed to possess the means to harm others. The Zathran people still live. Their worlds remain intact. Their civilian populations are unharmed, but they will never again be a military threat to anyone. The Admiral leaned forward slightly as if speaking directly to every being watching. This is the only warning we will give. Humanity extends the hand of friendship to all who meet us in peace. We will trade, negotiate, cooperate, and coexist with any species willing to do the same. We ask nothing more than mutual respect and the right to live without fear of extinction. But for those who mistake our kindness for weakness, who slaughter our people and laugh, who threaten us with annihilation, there will be no second chances." Her voice remained calm, but something in her eyes suggested depths of determination that would never bend. "We do not fight for glory. We do not fight for sport. We do not fight for conquest. We fight for absolutely nothing less than the complete removal of the threat. When we go to war, we do not seek to defeat our enemies. We seek to ensure they can never threaten anyone again. Ever. This is not a boast. This is not a threat. This is simply a fact about who we are when we stop holding back." She straightened, her tone softening slightly. "The Zathran wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about strength. Consider this our response. True strength is not measured by your capacity for violence. It is measured by your restraint. Any species can kill, any species can destroy, but building civilization, maintaining peace, choosing cooperation over conflict, that requires strength that violence can never match. We are capable of terrible things. You have now seen proof of that, but we choose not to be terrible when we can avoid it. We choose to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm, to talk instead of fight. That choice is what defines us, and that choice is what separates us from species like the Zathran, who saw violence as the only truth. Admiral Chen took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of genuine regret. We wish this had never been necessary. We wish the Zathran had chosen differently. We mourn the lives lost on both sides of this conflict. Our 10 million dead and the 15 million Zathran military personnel who died because their leaders forced this confrontation. But we will not apologize for defending ourselves. We will not apologize for ensuring our survival, and we will not allow anyone to threaten us with extinction without facing consequences that remove that threat. Permanently, the transmission began to wind down. Earth is open to diplomatic relations with any species, interested in peaceful coexistence. We offer trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and friendship. We ask only that you approach us with honest intentions. Come in peace and you will find no fiercer ally. Come with threats and you will find no more implacable enemy. This concludes our message. We return now to our own space to mourn our dead and rebuild our lives. But we will be watching. The galaxy should know that humanity is not what we appeared to be. We are not prey. We are not weak. We are not entertainment. We are a species that chooses peace because we understand war, and that makes all the difference. Admiral Chen's image faded, replaced by a simple symbol, a blue planet with a white moon, Earth and Luna together, representing humanity's home. The symbol remained on screens for several seconds. Then the transmission ended. Across the galaxy, reactions varied wildly. On Kelthera Prime, home to a species that had been conquered by the Zathran 2 centuries earlier, crowds gathered in public squares to watch the broadcast on communal screens. When it ended, they erupted in celebration. The Zathran had enslaved their world, taken their resources, and treated them as inferior beings for generations. To see their oppressors brought low by a species the Zathran had dismissed as weak brought a satisfaction that felt like justice finally served. In the Ordinance Confederation, a collection of peaceful trading worlds, the reaction was more mixed. Their leadership council met in emergency session to debate what the broadcast meant for galactic stability. Some argued that humanity had just demonstrated they were a threat equal to the Zathran. Others countered that humanity had shown remarkable restraint, eliminating only military targets and sparing civilian populations. The debate would continue for months, but the conclusion was already forming. Earth was now a significant power in the galaxy, and diplomatic relations should be established immediately. The Vraxian Empire, a militant species that had rivaled the Zathran for control of several border sectors, watched the broadcast with calculating interest. Their war councils analyzed the footage, trying to determine what technologies humanity possessed. The conclusion was disturbing. Human weapons were more advanced than they had any right to be for such a young spacefaring species. The Vraxians quietly shelved their own plans for expanding toward Earth's sector and sent a delegation to offer a non-aggression treaty. On the Zathran homeworld, the population watched the broadcast in silence. There was no anger, no defiance, no calls for revenge, just a profound understanding of how completely their world had changed. The species that had built an empire on the principle that strength was the only truth had been shown the limits of that philosophy. They had the strength to kill for entertainment, but humanity had the strength to dismantle an empire in less than a week. In the days following the broadcast, the Zathran began the difficult process of rebuilding their society without military power. Some adapted quickly, focusing on civilian industries and peaceful endeavors. Others struggled with the loss of identity that came from being stripped of their warrior culture. The High Council was dissolved, replaced by a civilian government that focused on internal development rather than external conquest. Commander Velt, the architect of the massacre, was tried by the new government. The trial was broadcast to the Zathran people as an acknowledgement of responsibility for what had been done. Felt was found guilty of crimes against sentient beings and sentenced to live the rest of its life working to support the families of Zathran military personnel who had died in the human response. It was a form of justice that focused on restoration rather than punishment, a change in thinking forced upon the Zathran by their new circumstances. On Earth, the reaction to the broadcast was more complicated. The public knew that humanity had responded to the Zathran threat, but most people didn't know the full scope of what had been done. They knew that Earth's military had acted, that the threat had been eliminated, but the specific details remained classified. The monitoring stations deployed throughout former Zathran space continued their silent watch. Automated systems tracked any development that might indicate military reconstruction. For the first year, there were several attempts. Small groups of Zathran nationalists tried to build weapons factories in remote systems, tried to construct warships in hidden shipyards, tried to revive the military culture that had defined their species for so long. Each attempt was detected immediately and eliminated just as quickly. Human vessels would appear, destroy the illegal construction and leave without any communication. The message was clear. The prohibition against Zathran military power was absolute and would be enforced without negotiation. After the first year, the attempt stopped. The Zathran as a species began to accept their new reality. They would never again be a military power. They would have to find new ways to define themselves, new sources of pride and identity beyond conquest and domination. It was a painful transition, but it was also an opportunity. Some Zathran began to excel in civilian fields, art, science, trade, philosophy. The species that had been warriors for centuries began learning how to be citizens of a galaxy that didn't revolve around military might. 3 years after the massacre, Earth received an unexpected communication. It came from the Zathran homeworld, specifically from a group calling themselves the Peace Reconstruction Committee. The message was simple. They wanted to send a delegation to Earth to offer a formal apology for what had been done. The request sparked intense debate within the UN. Many argued that an apology was meaningless, that it couldn't undo the deaths of 10 million people. Others suggested that accepting the apology was important for moving forward, for establishing that humanity could forgive even as it remained vigilant. Some worried it was a trick, though what trick could possibly threaten Earth now was unclear. In the end, the Secretary General decided to accept the delegation. A small group of Zathran civilians traveled to Earth, accompanied by human security that ensured they posed no threat. They were brought to the memorial outside the UN building, where they stood before the wall of names. The head of the delegation, a Zathran civilian who had lost family members in the human response, spoke publicly. The speech was broadcast on Earth and across Zathran space. "We come before you bearing shame," the Zathran said, its vertical mouth moving in the rhythm of its native language while translators converted the words to human speech. "We cannot undo what was done. We cannot bring back your dead. We cannot make right the horror that our leaders inflicted upon you. All we can do is acknowledge it, bear witness to it, and promise that we as a species are trying to become something better than what we were." The Zathran delegation stood in silence for an hour before the memorial, a gesture of respect that transcended cultural differences. Then they left Earth, returning to their own space. It wasn't forgiveness, the pain was too great for that, but it was perhaps the beginning of something like understanding. On Earth, life continued. The 10 million empty chairs at dinner tables would never be filled. The children who had lost parents, the parents who had lost children, the communities that had been torn apart, they all carried scars that would never fully heal. But they also carried forward, building lives in a galaxy that now knew humanity was not to be trifled with. The technologies that had been unlocked during Operation Prometheus remained sealed. The fold drives, the nanite weapons, the dimensional compression bombs, the singularity generators, all were locked away in facilities that required authorization from the highest levels of government to access. Scientists who had worked on the projects were reassigned to civilian research. Engineers who had built the weapon systems were given new projects that focused on exploration and development rather than destruction. But everyone knew the weapons existed. Everyone knew that if threatened with extinction again, humanity would not hesitate to unlock them. That knowledge changed the calculus of how other species interacted with Earth. There were no more casual dismissals of human capability. No more assumptions that humanity was weak simply because they preferred peace. 10 years after the massacre, A generation of children who had grown up in this new reality reached adulthood. They had been taught from early ages that humanity existed in a dangerous galaxy, that other species existed, that maintaining peace required strength as much as goodwill. They were the first generation to think of themselves as galactic citizens rather than simply Earth citizens. These young people would go on to be diplomats, traders, scientists, and explorers. They would establish the first human colonies outside the solar system, building settlements on worlds dozens of light years from Earth. They would marry aliens from other species, creating the first generation of hybrid families. They would write music that blended human and alien traditions, create art that synthesized different cultural perspectives, develop technologies that combined human innovation with alien knowledge. They were proof that something good could grow from even the darkest events. The massacre had forced humanity to confront its own capacity for violence, but it had also opened the galaxy to human presence. The price had been terrible, but what humanity built with the security that price purchased would be remarkable. Admiral Chen, who had delivered the broadcast to the galaxy, retired from military service 5 years after the operation. She spent her remaining years teaching at the newly established Academy of Interstellar Studies, training the next generation of human leaders who would navigate the complex politics of a multi-species galaxy. Her lectures were always popular, though she rarely spoke about Operation Prometheus directly. When students asked about it, she would simply say that she hoped they would never face similar choices, but that if they did, they should remember that strength without wisdom is just violence, and violence without purpose is just cruelty. The Secretary General who had authorized Protocol Erebus served out her term and refused to run for re-election. She gave one final speech before stepping down, addressing the question that had haunted her since the operation ended. "We did what we had to do," she said. "We protected our species from extinction, but we also unleashed something dark within ourselves, something we had kept locked away because we understood its danger. The question I have struggled with is whether we are still the same species after crossing that line, whether we can still claim to be civilized after proving we can be so efficiently uncivilized when necessary." She paused, looking out at the assembly of world leaders and representatives. "I believe we can, because we struggle with these questions, because we mourn what we had to do even as we acknowledge it was necessary, because we chose to lock those weapons away again, rather than keep them ready at hand. We are not defined by our capacity for violence. We are defined by our choice to restrain that capacity. The Zathran never understood that distinction. I pray we never forget it." 50 years after the massacre, the memorial in Geneva was expanded. Next to the wall of 10 million human names, a second wall was added. It bore 15 million Zathran names, the military personnel who had died in the human response. The decision to add this wall was controversial, with many arguing that the Zathran dead should not be memorialized alongside human victims. But the organizers of the memorial explained their reasoning. The monument was not about honoring the Zathran military. It was about remembering the cost of war, all of it. The innocent dead and the guilty dead. The victims and the perpetrators who were themselves victims of a culture that glorified violence. The names served as a reminder that when humanity goes to war, the death toll is measured in millions, and that reality should never be forgotten or become comfortable. The galaxy had changed in those 50 years. The empty space left by the Zathran collapse had been filled by new alliances, new trade routes, new political configurations. Humanity was now an established presence, with colonies on 17 worlds and diplomatic relations with more than 100 species. Earth was considered a significant power. Not through military dominance, the weapons remained locked away, but through trade, culture, and the simple fact that everyone remembered what happened to the Zathran. The Zathran themselves had changed perhaps most dramatically. The species that had once prided itself on military conquest now specialized in conflict resolution and peacekeeping. Having learned the hard way that violence leads only to destruction, they became advocates for diplomatic solutions to galactic disputes. It was a complete reversal of their culture, born from necessity but growing into genuine transformation. Some species found this transformation inspiring. Others found it suspicious, wondering if the Zathran were simply waiting for an opportunity to rebuild their military power. But the monitoring stations remained active, and after 50 years without any attempted violations, even the skeptics had to acknowledge that the change seemed permanent. On Earth, in a small apartment in Geneva, an old woman sat by a window looking out at the memorial. She was 73 years old now, with gray hair and lines on her face that told stories of a life lived through trauma and beyond it. She had been 8 years old when her mother died in the arena. She had been the little girl standing alone on the platform,